Bible opens with the most dramatic statement that you could ever find. I'm reading from the English Standard Version here. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, 'Let light be.' And it was light." You know, we take that for granted. We take that for granted not in meaning. We understand that the meaning is important. We look around and we think so much of the world would be better if we would recognize that the world began with a creator. But we don't always take into account how beautiful the opening of our Bible is. The opening of Genesis chapter 1 to about Genesis chapter 2, verse 3, is maybe one of the most extraordinary prose poems ever written. Eric Auerbach, who is the great literary critic, didn't believe in God in any way, but he felt that the book of Genesis might just be the greatest work of literature ever. Greater than Shakespeare, greater than any of the works of Homer, greater than even any of the works from any part of the world. And the reason why, he argued, is what he called gaps. And he felt that the gaps of Genesis make this the greatest work of literature. What does he mean by that? It doesn't mean that there are things missing. It just means that the description is sparse. And yet, at the same time, it's just the right amount of words to affect us emotionally. He even sent out a challenge for his students, writing in the 1940s while he was in exile because he was anti-Nazi. So the Nazis put him under house arrest, but he still was allowed to write. And he gave his students a challenge. He said, "I challenge you to take any story of Genesis and to write it in fewer words than are in the account, and still have the kind of power, the kind of emotional heft that the book of Genesis has." I've given this assignment to my students. I've said, try to tell the story of Cain and Abel in fewer words than are in Genesis and still have emotional power. They can't do it. They can write it in fewer words, but it doesn't seem to have anything that grabs the soul. Try writing the story of Noah or Abraham or Jacob or Joseph in fewer words. You can't do it. What we want to do is the same thing that Shakespeare would do, that Homer would do, and that is tell us everything that we're about to hear, then tell us what we need to hear right now, and then tell us what we just heard. They'll tell us in so much detail that in some ways we don't even have to use our imagination anymore. Whereas Genesis gives us just enough. And no better example than Genesis 1. And I want to walk us through Genesis 1. I want us to notice the sparse detail and yet how beautiful it is. And I'm going to read it in a translation that I worked on when I was in grad school. And in it, I tried very hard to capture the feeling of the original Hebrew, which means I actually tried to use the word Elohim in referring to God. Elohim has to be one of the most beautiful words in all of Scripture. We translate it as God, and that's a perfectly good translation. God. But our word God has a lot of baggage to it, doesn't it? Because it doesn't mean the same thing to each person. Elohim, however, Elohim means God, but it can mean God, but it can also mean gods. Same word. It is masculine, but it can be feminine. It's a remarkable word. So Genesis 1 says, it began when Elohim first crafted sky and earth. I'm going to stop right there. Genesis 1 does not want us to see the idea that God is creating the sky above and space and a planet. Whoever sat down to write Genesis 1 didn't have the concept of a planet yet, nor even a concept of sky and space like we do. But what he did have a concept of is the place where we live and the place where God lives. And it says, it all began when Elohim first crafted our world and his world. And earth was crude and chaotic, and darkness covered the abyss, and Elohim's breath hovered over the waters. Can I just mention a few things interesting about this moment right here? First of all, the earth is crude and chaotic, or in Hebrew, the earth is tohu bohu. We're not even sure how to translate that. Tohu bohu. It's void and without form. And just as good a translation might be, and the earth was mishmash. The earth was gobbledygook. Whatever it is, it's not any place where any life could live. The earth is chaos. And all through Genesis, and that's going to be a theme through the rest of the Bible, all through Genesis, we're going to see God bringing order into chaos and then bringing chaos into order. And the earth was crude and chaotic, tohu bohu, and darkness covered the abyss. And Elohim's breath hovered over the waters, and Elohim said, let light be. And light was. And Elohim looked at the light and liked what he saw. One of the things that's different about the Genesis account of creation from every single other creation story, and believe me, I have read hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of creation stories from around the world, but there is only one creation story in which God, the Creator, looks at what he makes and really likes it. He looks at his work and likes what he sees. This is important. This is important as we read the entire text. This is something that literary critics of every stripe have noticed. That they've noticed that one thing that makes the Bible different is that God began with something he loved. And he's going to spend much of the rest of his efforts bringing it back to a state that he likes. And that is bringing us to him. That is beautiful, and we cannot lose that. But there is the gospel in Genesis 1. And he and God separated light from darkness, calling out to the light, day, and to the darkness, night. And it was evening, and it was morning, first day. It's beautiful. Hardly any words. If you notice how few words were in that, and so much occurs right there. Just like Eric Auerbach said, you can't tell this story in fewer words and have that kind of emotional power. This is not only spiritual genius, This is literary genius. And Elohim said, let a vault come from between the waters, water split from water. And Elohim built the vault, separating water held beneath the vault from water held above the vault. And so it was. And Elohim called out to the vault, sky. And it was evening, and it was morning, second day. And Elohim said, let waters held beneath the sky converge to one place, and let dry soil appear. And so they were. And Elohim called out to the dry soil, earth, and to the water mass, sea. And once again we hear, and Elohim looked at his work and liked what he saw. You know, we can learn a lot from a text like this. The ancient rabbis read this not only as a text of creation, but also as an instruction on how to live. How so, you say? Because we can't create a world. We can't create light by just speaking it. We can't separate water from water by speaking. But the rabbi said one thing we can do is we can look at what we've made. We can look at what we've accomplished and say it is good. There's something beautiful about doing that. I think that that is beautiful. And then the text goes on, and Elohim said, and notice the repetition here. In English, I think this has a feeling of almost like you said this already, but in the original language, it has a feeling of just poetic power. And Elohim said, let soil sprout grass and seed-making plants of each kind, and fruit-making trees of each kind, and the seed put back into the soil. And so they were. And then it tells us again what just happened. And soil sprouted grass and seed-making plants of each kind, and seed-making trees of each kind, and their seed put back into the soil. And Elohim looked at his work and liked what he saw. You almost can hear it as a song. J.R.R. Tolkien read this, and he said he couldn't imagine God creating the world just speaking these things, that the words have such a musicality to them that he said God must have sung these words. And I kind of agree with him. And if you've ever read his book, The Silmarillion, which is a kind of prequel, if you will, kind of a biblical text to go with Middle Earth. And if any of you are Tolkien fans, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a long, tedious book, The Silmarillion, that only the true fans of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit series would read, and not necessarily cover to cover. But all through it, Tolkien is responding to what's happening here in Scripture, because Tolkien was a very devout Christian. He couldn't imagine God not singing these words, so he opens up his text with God creating the world by singing. Moving further on, notice again, and imagine God singing these words. And Elohim said, let lights be hung within the vault space, distinguishing the day from the night. And they will serve as waymarks, marking the times and the days and the years, and let them serve to illuminate the vault, pouring their light onto the soil. And so they were. And Elohim built 2 big lights, the biggest to dominate the day, and the smallest to dominate the night and stars. And Elohim gave these lights to the vault to pour down light onto the soil and to dominate the day and the night. And once again, Elohim looked at his work and liked what he saw. And it was evening and it was morning, 4th day. Can you hear the musicality of the words of God there? I've tried really hard to capture that, but you can hear it just as well in King James. I can hear it just as well when I hear the New International or the Revised Standard Version. I can hear it in the English Standard Version. You can't help it. It's so embedded in there that even in some of our translations that are not trying to be musical at all, the musicality comes out of it. And then we go on. And Elohim said, "Let the water mass swarm with life, and let the birds wing above the soil within the vault of sky." And Elohim crafted monstrous monsters, and every creeping creature, so the waters might swarm with its own kind, and every winged bird with its own kind. And Elohim looked at his work and liked what he saw. And Elohim blessed them, saying, "Be fertile and breed many, and swarm the sea, and let the birds breed many on earth." And it was evening, and it was morning, 5th day. And then it goes on. And Elohim said, and listen to this, it sounds perhaps repetitious unless you imagine it as a song. "Let the soil raise up creatures of each kind, and livestock, and soil crawlers, and earth beasts of each kind." And so they were. And Elohim crafted the earth beasts of each kind, and the livestock of each kind, and the soil crawlers of each kind. And Elohim looked at his work and liked what he saw. You'd hear that musicality. And Elohim said, "Let us craft an Adam." Let's stop there for a moment. Let us craft an Adam. Do you realize that there is nobody in the Bible named Adam? Nobody. Adam is not the name of the first human creation. Adam is what he is. Adam, Ha-Adam, the Adam. And it's a pun. It's meant to be funny, a little bit. It's a pun on the word Adamah. Adamah literally means red dirt. So when Genesis says that God says, "Let's craft Ha-Adam," what he's saying is, let's craft a red dirt man. Or if you prefer, let's craft a red dirt thing. I love how Robert Alter translates it as, "Let's craft a red earthling." Now the problem with that is it sounds a little sci-fi-ish, but I do like it. His name isn't Adam, that's what he is. He is the red dirt man. If you've ever been into the region of Israel, what now is modern day Iraq, you'll notice that the ground is red. So if God made Adam out of the red mud, then Adam would have red flesh. So if anybody ever asks you what color was Adam, I just say, well, he's the color of the red dirt. But I love this. Let us craft an Adam, a red dirt man, as an image of us, similar to us, and let it dominate the sea fish and the sky birds and the livestock and the whole earth and every soil crawler that crawls on the earth. Again, hear the musicality of that. And Elohim crafted the Adam to be like himself, crafted it as an image of himself, and he crafted it both male and female. And Elohim blessed them and said, "Be fertile and breed many, and swarm the earth and manage it, and dominate the sea fish and the sky birds and every soil crawler that crawls on the soil." Oh, I can't help but hear him singing that. And Elohim said, "Look, I have given you the seed-making plants through the soil surface, and every tree with fruit-making seed to be your food, and for every earth beast, and for every sky bird, and for every soil crawler that crawls with life breath in it, the green plants will be their food." And so they were. And Elohim looked at his work and liked what he saw. And it was evening, and it was morning, the sixth day. My point here is that when we read this, we often want to read it from a scientific point of view. And I take this as a literal account. And maybe some of you do, some of you don't. But I want us to try to do something that might be a little hard for us sometime. I want us to read it as a literary passage. I want us to realize that this is not only spiritual genius, and this isn't just a historical document in this moment. This is a poetic masterpiece that is full of just the rhythms of not just speech, but the rhythm of song. And I love to think that the world began with a song. My dad used to say that if aliens ever landed on the earth, having been listening to radio, what would they think we sounded like? Well, truth is, they would think we sounded like singing, because that's most of what's on the radio, unless you're on AM radio where they mostly are talking. But if you're on FM, it's mostly music. Because I think we as humans, well, I think we do often think and live our lives to the rhythm of music. So it's not impossible for me to imagine that the world was created by the world's greatest singer, the world's greatest composer, the world's greatest poet, and that is God himself. So read it with new eyes and new ears, and hear for the first time, and pick whatever version you want. You will see it. This is why I do like turning to the old King James. It may be 1611, it may be very old, but one of the things that the King James writers did is, along with scholars, they also hired poets. There were poets on staff. We don't know who they were. We don't even know who the scholars were. But we know they had poets, and the poets were hired for one purpose, and that's to try to capture in English the beauty of the poetic feel of the original languages. Not to make them sound like the original languages, but to make something that was comparable. And they may have hit their zenith, if you will, their most proud moment, right in chapter 1 of Genesis. So read it again, and listen, and maybe even sing it.